What really happened to Malaysian Flight 370? For years, theories have swirled, with some believing it simply crashed, others suspect something far more sinister, and a few even think it's aliens.
They finally released some of the footage of the aircraft before it disappeared, and there's objects rotating around the plane, changing its course, and then poof, it's just gone.
But the truth is, this case runs deeper than most people realize. In this video, I'll break down what the latest evidence actually says, and why it's still sparking debate around the world. The signal that shattered everything we knew. March 8, 2014, a date that would forever be seared into aviation history. At precisely 12:41 a.m. local time, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, a Boeing 777-200ER carrying 239 souls, 227 passengers, and 12 crew members, bound for Beijing, China. It was supposed to be a routine red-eye flight, the kind that happens thousands of times across the globe every single night. 5 hours and 34 minutes of peaceful cruising through the darkness, passengers dozing in their seats, the hum of engines providing a rhythmic lullaby. But Flight 370 never made it to Beijing. Instead, it vanished into thin air, triggering what would become the most expensive aviation search in human history, exceeding 200 million and spawning a mystery so profound, so utterly baffling, that even 11 years later, we're still desperately searching for answers in the depths of the Indian Ocean. What happened in those early morning hours? How does a massive commercial airliner, equipped with multiple redundant communication systems, simply disappear from the face of the Earth? And most hauntingly of all, what were the final moments like for those 239 people as their plane diverted from its planned course and flew for 7 agonizing hours into oblivion? The official story, pieced together from radar data and satellite pings, reads like something out of a thriller novel. At 1:19 a.m., the captain signed off with air traffic control with a routine "Good night, Malaysian 370, a phrase that would become chillingly prophetic. Just 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the plane's transponder was deliberately disabled, causing it to disappear from civilian radar screens. The aircraft then executed a sharp turn, banking back over the Malay Peninsula, crossing directly over military installations as if being piloted by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. For the next several hours, MH370 flew on, tracked only by military radar and mysterious automated satellite handshakes, digital pings between the aircraft's engines, and an Inmarsat satellite orbiting above the Indian Ocean. These pings, these ghostly electronic whispers, would continue until 8:19 a.m. when the plane presumably ran out of fuel and plunged into the remote southern Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from any land, in one of the most isolated stretches of water on planet Earth. All 239 people aboard were declared dead, but without a crash site, without wreckage, without bodies, without the black boxes that could tell us what happened in that cockpit, the families were left with nothing but questions, grief, and an aching void where answers should be. For years, that's where the story seemed destined to end, a tragic mystery, forever unsolved, until a single piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. A phone signal, one brief, fleeting connection to a cell tower, 31 minutes after the transponder went dark. A digital breadcrumb that might, just might, unlock the truth about what really happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. But here's what makes this discovery so explosive, so absolutely earth-shattering. The phone that made this connection. It belonged to First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, the 27-year-old co-pilot with 2,763 flight hours under his belt. And according to every aviation protocol, every safety checklist, every standard operating procedure, that phone should never, ever have been turned on.
It would be rare, very rare, in my opinion, to have someone with the cell phone on in the cockpit. It's never supposed to be on at all. It's part of every checklist of every airline I'm familiar with.
Think about that for a moment. Let it really sink in. In the midst of whatever catastrophe, whatever emergency, whatever deliberate action was unfolding aboard Flight 370, someone in that cockpit, most likely the young co-pilot himself, turned on his personal cell phone, not to browse social media, not to check messages, but searching for service, desperately seeking any connection to the outside world. Why? Was he trying to call for help? Was he attempting to alert authorities that something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong? Or was this the final, futile gesture of a man who knew he was about to die and wanted to reach out one last time to the world he was leaving behind? The evidence is simultaneously tantalizing and frustratingly incomplete. According to US officials who spoke to CNN, Malaysian authorities confirmed that a cell tower near Penang, Malaysia, roughly 250 miles from where the plane made its mysterious turnaround, picked up a roaming signal from Hamid's phone. The timing, precisely 1:52:27 a.m. a.m. Malaysian time, exactly 31 minutes and 6 seconds after the transponder went dark. Read that again. His was the only phone turned on. Out of 239 people aboard that aircraft, 239 souls carrying at least that many cell phones between them, only one device made contact with the outside world. Only one person, in those desperate moments as the plane carved its unauthorized path across Malaysian airspace, had the presence of mind or the opportunity to activate their phone and seek help. But here's where this story takes an even darker turn. Despite the phone searching for service, despite it successfully connecting with the Bandar Baru Farliam cell tower in Penang, no call was ever completed, no communication was recorded, no message was sent. The signal was there, brief, fleeting, a digital ghost crying out in the darkness, and then nothing. For the families of the passengers, this revelation was both a glimmer of hope and a fresh wound. It meant that someone, at least one person aboard that doomed flight, was conscious, aware, and trying to make contact as the plane flew off course. But it also meant that whatever prevented MH370 from reaching its destination also prevented that desperate cry for help from getting through. Aviation experts immediately recognized the significance. Under normal circumstances, at cruising altitude, typically 35,000 feet or higher, cell phone signals simply cannot reach ground towers.
He could have tried to do something with the phone. We don't know.
You know, the interesting thing about that is that no other phones connected to it. It was just specifically his cell phone.
The distance is too great, the speed too fast, the signal too weak. For a phone to successfully ping a tower mid-flight, the aircraft would need to be flying significantly lower than its assigned altitude.
Typically, there's not even time to do that. But they were still high enough in which it just made the connection, and there was no speaking or no long period of time.
The Malaysian Safety Investigation Report, released in July 2018, confirmed this crucial detail. According to Telekom Malaysia, follow-up tests conducted in May 2014 using a King Air 350 aircraft demonstrated that successful cell connections were possible below 5,000 feet, with intermittent connectivity occurring up to 8,000, 10,000 feet. But at the normal cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, impossible. This meant that at 1:52 a.m., as First Officer Farik Hamid's phone desperately searched for a signal, MH370 was flying low, dangerously low, low enough to be within range of ground-based cellular infrastructure. Military radar data corroborated this, showing the aircraft had descended to approximately 5,000 feet as it crossed over Penang before climbing back up and continuing its inexorable journey south. But why? Why would the plane descend so dramatically in the middle of its unauthorized diversion? Was it mechanical failure forcing the aircraft lower? Was someone deliberately flying beneath radar coverage? Or was the co-pilot, in those precious few moments of lower altitude, seizing the only opportunity he might have to signal the outside world? The implications are staggering. If Hamid was indeed trying to call for help, it suggests he was conscious, aware of the emergency, and potentially not in control of the situation. It suggests that whatever was happening in that cockpit, he was desperately trying to intervene, to alert someone, anyone, about the catastrophe unfolding at 35,000 feet.
When the plane first went missing, authorities said millions of cell phone records were searched, looking for evidence calls had been made from the plane, but turned up nothing. Still, if Hamid's cell phone connected with the tower, it only adds to the evidence that the plane turned westward from its planned path, and that the plane was likely flying low enough for a cell tower to pick up the phone signal.
Yet the official Malaysian investigation treated this bombshell revelation with curious restraint. Malaysia's transport minister initially dismissed early media reports about the phone signal as unverified, noting that many early leads in the investigation had proved baseless. When pressed about whether the co-pilot had attempted to make a call, the minister's response was maddeningly vague.
As far as I know, no, but like I said, that would be in the realm of the police and the other international agencies, and when the time comes, that will be revealed. But I do not want to speculate on that at the moment.
When the time comes, that would be revealed. 11 years later, we're still waiting for that revelation. We're still waiting for answers about what First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid was trying to do in those desperate moments. We're still waiting to understand why, if he was attempting to signal for help, that help never came. And here's perhaps the most chilling detail of all. The 2018 Malaysian Safety Investigation Report confirms the signal detection, but notes no further activity from any personal phones aboard the aircraft after that single single solitary ping at 1:52 a.m. Whatever window of opportunity existed for communication, it closed as quickly as it opened. After that brief moment over Penang, as the plane climbed back to altitude and turned south toward its ultimate fate, the passengers and crew of Flight 370 were truly alone, cut off from the world, flying through the darkness toward an appointment with the vast, empty Indian Ocean. But that single phone signal, that one desperate ping reaching out across the void, might contain the key to understanding everything that happened that night. Because if we can understand why the co-pilot turned on his phone, if we can unravel what he was trying to do, who he was trying to reach, what emergency he was responding to, we might finally be able to piece together the truth about Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. The question is, what was that truth? And more importantly, are we ready to hear it? Theories, evidence, and the desperate search for truth. The co-pilot's phone signal changed everything. Before this revelation, investigators were working with fragmentary radar data, cryptic satellite pings, and an almost complete absence of direct evidence about what happened aboard Flight 370. But this single connection, this digital breadcrumb left behind in the chaos, opened up entirely new avenues of investigation, and with it came an explosion of theories, some plausible, some extraordinary, all attempting to explain the inexplicable. Let's start with what we know for certain, the indisputable facts that form the foundation of any credible theory about MH370's disappearance. The official timeline, painstakingly reconstructed by investigators from multiple countries, tells us that Flight 370 took off at 12:41 a.m. on March 8, 2014. Everything proceeded normally for the first 38 minutes. At 1:07 a.m., the aircraft transmitted its last routine ACARS message, an automated systems update that showed all parameters were normal. At 1:19 a.m. came the final voice contact, that now infamous sign-off, "Good night, Malaysian 370. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the transponder stopped transmitting. The plane disappeared from civilian air traffic control screens, but it didn't disappear entirely. Malaysian military radar continued tracking an unidentified aircraft, later confirmed to be MHD-370, as it made a deliberate turn, crossing back over the Malay Peninsula, flying northwest over the Strait of Malacca and heading toward the Andaman Sea. At 1:52:27 a.m., exactly 31 minutes and 6 seconds after the transponder went dark, First Officer Fariq Hamid's phone pinged that cell tower in Penang. The plane was flying low, within range of ground-based cellular networks, searching desperately for any connection to the world below. By 2:22 a.m., MH370 vanished from military radar as well, but the aircraft's Rolls-Royce engines continued their automated handshakes with an Inmarsat satellite for another 6 hours. These satellite pings, analyzed through complex Doppler shift calculations, revealed that the plane flew south, deep into the Indian Ocean, until the final automated transmission at 8:19 a.m., when investigators believe the aircraft ran out of fuel and crashed into the sea. These are the facts, the hard data, the timeline that no credible theory can contradict. But interpretation, that's where everything becomes murky, contested, and maddeningly uncertain. The official investigation, led by Malaysia with assistance from Australia, China, and the United States, concluded in 2018 that Flight 370 was deliberately diverted by manual piloting. Someone in that cockpit made conscious decisions to turn off communication systems, alter the flight path, and fly the aircraft thousands of miles off course. The report's conclusion was stark. The team is unable to determine the real cause for the disappearance, but they ruled out mechanical failure, fire, or hijacking by passengers. This left only one truly plausible explanation, at least in the eyes of many investigators: deliberate action by someone with extensive knowledge of Boeing 777 systems, someone who knew exactly how to disable the transponder, how to avoid radar detection, how to program the flight management system for an automated southern journey into oblivion. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the 53-year-old pilot with over 18,000 flight hours, became the focus of intense scrutiny. FBI analysis of his home flight simulator discovered deleted files showing a practice route that ended in fuel exhaustion over the southern Indian Ocean, eerily similar to MH370's suspected path. He was described as politically engaged, vocal in his support for Malaysian opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim, who had been sentenced to prison just hours before the flight took off. The pilot's suicide theory gained traction, particularly after aviation journalist William Langewiesche published a comprehensive analysis in The Atlantic, arguing it was the only explanation that fit all available evidence. The theory suggested that Captain Zahari deliberately depressurized the cabin to incapacitate everyone else aboard through hypoxia, oxygen deprivation, before setting the aircraft on its final, fatal autopilot journey south. But here's where the co-pilot's phone signal throws a massive wrench into this neat explanation. If Captain Zahari had indeed incapacitated everyone through depressurization, how was First Officer Farid Hamid conscious, aware, and capable of turning on his phone 31 minutes after the crisis began? How was he able to take action during that brief window over Penang when the plane descended to 5,000 feet? Some experts have suggested that extra oxygen was loaded into the cockpit, enough for Captain Zahari to survive a depressurization event that would render everyone else unconscious within minutes. But what about the co-pilot? Was he complicit? Was he fighting back? Was that phone signal his last desperate attempt to alert the world about what was happening in that cockpit? The alternative theories only deepen the mystery. Some aviation experts pointed to the possibility of mechanical failure, specifically a cargo fire from the 221 kilograms of lithium batteries stored in the hold. This theory, popularized by pilot and blogger Chris Goodfellow, suggested that smoke and fire in the cockpit forced the crew to turn back toward the nearest airport, but they were overcome by toxic fumes before they could complete the emergency landing. The plane then flew on autopilot for hours, a ghost flight with everyone aboard already dead. But this explanation falters when confronted with the evidence of deliberate actions, the precise timing of the transponder shutdown, the methodical turn that took the aircraft exactly along the border of Malaysian and Thai airspace, where radar coverage was weakest, and the co-pilot's phone signal suggesting someone was conscious and attempting to communicate. Then there are the more controversial theories, the ones that venture into territory that makes official investigators uncomfortable but refuse to die in the court of public opinion. The hijacking theory never quite went away, despite the lack of any credible claims of responsibility. Early in the investigation, attention focused on 2 Iranian passengers traveling on stolen European passports, but they were later identified as asylum seekers with no connection to terrorism. Still, the possibility that someone aboard the plane, whether a passenger or crew member, seized control of the aircraft continues to circulate, particularly given the deliberate nature of the flight path deviation. But perhaps the most explosive theory, one that has gained disturbing traction in recent years, involves allegations of cyber hijacking or remote takeover of the aircraft's systems. This theory hinges on Boeing's patented uninterruptible autopilot system, designed after 9/11 to prevent hijackers from using commercial aircraft as weapons. The system, at least in theory, would allow ground controllers to override pilot commands and safely land a hijacked aircraft. Conspiracy theorists seized on this technology, suggesting it could be exploited not to save a hijacked plane, but to remotely seize control of one. Some versions of this theory claim that Flight 370 was diverted to Diego Garcia, the secretive US military base in the Indian Ocean, either to extract valuable cargo or to prevent sensitive technology from reaching China.
Oh, Diego Garcia is a very secret facility. Of course, we're there. Intelligence is there. Certain sectors of the military are there, but nobody knows what they're doing at Diego Garcia in terms of the public. It just sits there doing the intelligence community's bidding. And of course, recent reports have come out about Diego Garcia's possible role in the Malaysian Flight 370 and its utter disappearance. In my view, there were on board Malaysian, you may know this, Flight 370 on board were a company that had engineers that were developing chips that could function at room temperature, supercompute at room temperature. Extremely valuable technology to defense and intelligence. They were on that plane. And we mentioned before, I think you have interviewed somebody on this. They finally released some of the footage of the aircraft before it disappeared, and there's objects rotating around the plane, changing its course, and then poof, it's just gone. No wreckage, and the wreckage they claim they found an ocean away wasn't even from that flight. So there's something that really needs the American people to look into, and maybe this new administration to get something. I think something really nefarious happened there.
I think that the government has technology that we couldn't even imagine.
The cargo theory had particular appeal because 20 employees of Freescale Semiconductor were aboard the flight, 12 Malaysian and 8 Chinese engineers working on advanced microchip technology with potential military applications. Wild speculation suggested these passengers held valuable patents that would be transferred upon their deaths, making them targets for corporate or state espionage. However, fact-checkers thoroughly debunked these claims, demonstrating that the patent in question existed before the flight, that the passengers were not inventors on the patent, and that standard corporate ownership structures meant no one benefited financially from their deaths. Still, the theory persists, fed by legitimate questions about why so many details of the investigation remain classified, why certain radar data from military installations was never fully released, and why the Malaysian government consulted with foreign intelligence agencies whose findings were never made public. And then there are the truly fringe theories, the ones that venture into territory most serious investigators refuse to consider, but which nonetheless captivate millions online. The alien abduction theory, the teleportation via mysterious glowing orbs theory, the black hole theory. Yes, that was actually discussed on CNN in the early days of the search, much to the embarrassment of everyone involved. These theories exploded in 2023 when researcher Ashton Forbes promoted videos purporting to show 3 glowing orbs circling Flight 370 before it vanished in a flash of light. The videos went viral, accumulating millions of views and spawning countless discussions about advanced propulsion technology, zero-point energy, and government cover-ups of extraterrestrial contact. Multiple forensic analyses have thoroughly debunked these videos as CGI fabrications, demonstrating pixel-perfect matches to stock visual effects assets and identifying compositing errors that prove they're hoaxes. Yet they continue to circulate, particularly in communities already predisposed to believe in government conspiracies and hidden technology. What makes all of these theories, from the plausible to the fantastical, so persistent is the complete absence of definitive proof. Despite the most extensive aviation search in history, covering over 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor at a cost exceeding $200 million, the main wreckage of Flight 370 has never been found. Only about 30 pieces of debris have washed ashore on islands across the western Indian Ocean, confirmed through serial numbers and forensic analysis to have come from the missing Boeing 777. A flaperon, a piece of the wing, discovered on Réunion Island in July 2015, provided the first physical proof that the plane had crashed. The pattern of barnacle growth and ocean drift modeling confirmed it had spent months in the Indian Ocean, consistent with the satellite data suggesting the plane ended its journey somewhere along the 7th arc, a calculated line in the ocean where the final satellite ping originated. But without the black boxes, without the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder that could tell us definitively what happened in those final hours, we're left with fragments, with educated guesses, with scenarios that fit the available data but can never be proven. And that brings us back to the co-pilot's phone signal, because buried in that single desperate ping might be the clue that finally unlocks this mystery. If First Officer Farik Hamid was conscious and attempting to communicate at 1:52 a.m., it tells us something crucial about what was happening in that cockpit. It tells us that whatever scenario unfolded, whether pilot suicide, hijacking, mechanical emergency, or something else entirely, at least one person aboard was aware, alert, and fighting to reach the outside world. But the signal also raises troubling questions. Why was his the only phone that connected? Out of 239 people aboard, surely others must have been conscious during that brief window over Penang when the plane descended low enough for cell service. Were passengers prevented from accessing their phones? Had the cabin already been depressurized, rendering everyone except the flight crew unconscious? Or was there something unique about the co-pilot's position, his access to oxygen, his understanding of what was happening that allowed him this one chance to signal for help? And perhaps most haunting of all, what happened after that signal? Why did the connection fail? What prevented First Officer Hamid from completing a call, from sending a message, from leaving behind any information about the catastrophe unfolding at 35,000 feet? Digital forensics, ongoing searches, and the race against time. Here's something that might surprise you. Even if Flight 370's wreckage is discovered at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, even if the fuselage is recovered from depths exceeding 6,000 meters, there's a very real possibility that the cell phones carried by passengers and crew could still yield recoverable data. In April 2014, as the search for MH370 intensified and the co-pilot's phone signal revelation made headlines, CNN decided to conduct an experiment that would send chills down the spine of anyone following this story. They wanted to answer a simple but profound question. If the plane is found, could investigators extract messages, photos, videos, and call logs from the phones of those 239 souls, the digital ghosts of their final moments?
But could they be retrieved if the plane is found?
Absolutely. It's a matter of finding the devices, determining what kind of damage was associated with them, and handling them properly.
The experiment was brutally simple. CNN researchers took a cell phone, loaded it with unsent emails, text messages, photos, and videos simulating what passengers might have tried to send during those desperate hours when their phones had no signal. They then submerged the phone in salt water designed to replicate the chemical composition of the Indian Ocean, placed it in a pressure chamber to simulate the crushing depths of the ocean floor, and left it there for 8 days. Made its way all the way inside, built up on top of the electronics, and whether or not it corroded the memory chip or the data stored, it's going to overflow a little bit. Because oxygen will quickly increase corrosion, our phone is kept in water. We're just going to keep it in the same water that it was in until we can get it back to the lab and get it in a solution where we can begin to clean it up. The results were extraordinary and heartbreaking. After being meticulously cleaned in an ultrasonic bath to remove salt deposits, after the memory chip was carefully extracted and connected to specialized equipment, the forensic experts recovered everything. Think about what this means. Somewhere at the bottom of the Indian Ocean, in the wreckage of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, there could be dozens of cell phones containing the final thoughts, the desperate messages, the goodbye texts that passengers tried to send as they realized their plane was flying further and further from civilization, photos of loved ones, videos recorded in those last moments, emails frantically typed but never sent because there was no signal, no connection, no way to reach the world they were leaving behind. Digital forensics experts have confirmed that modern smartphone memory chips are remarkably resilient, capable of surviving extreme conditions that would destroy almost everything else. The plastic casing deteriorates, the screens shatter, the batteries corrode, but the solid-state memory chips, those tiny silicon wafers containing gigabytes of data, can remain intact and recoverable even after years of submersion in salt water at crushing ocean depths. This is both a technological marvel and an almost unbearable reminder of what's at stake. Every day that passes without finding the wreckage is another day that those digital messages, those final communications from 239 people to the loved ones they would never see again, remain trapped in the darkness, kilometers below the surface, waiting to be discovered. And the search continues, against all odds, despite years of failure and frustration, despite the enormous financial cost, and the seemingly impossible task of finding a single aircraft in millions of square kilometers of ocean. The search continues. In December 2024, Malaysia approved a new search effort by Ocean Infinity, a company specializing in deep-sea exploration using autonomous underwater vehicles. The contract is structured on a no-find, no-fee basis, meaning Ocean Infinity will only be paid if they successfully locate the main wreckage. The search area covers approximately 15,000 square kilometers in the southern Indian Ocean based on refined analysis of satellite data, debris drift patterns, and advanced mathematical modeling. The search began in February 2025, but was suspended in April due to harsh weather conditions and seasonal ocean currents. Operations are expected to resume by late 2025 when conditions improve. The technology being deployed is vastly more sophisticated than what was available in the original 2014-2017 search efforts. AI-enhanced sonar mapping, advanced autonomous submarines capable of operating at extreme depths, and machine learning algorithms that can identify aircraft debris patterns even in complex underwater terrain. But here's what makes this search different, what gives it a renewed sense of urgency beyond just technological capability. The families are still fighting for answers. More than 11 years after their loved ones vanished, they continue to demand transparency, accountability, and closure. They've organized petitions, held annual commemorations, and lobbied governments to keep searching, to keep investigating, to never give up on finding the truth. And central to their demands is this question that haunts everyone who's followed this story. What was First Officer Farik Hamid trying to tell the world when he turned on his phone over Penang? Recent analysis by amateur investigators using WSPR, Weak Signal Propagation Reporter technology, a global network of radio signals that can potentially detect aircraft, has suggested possible refinements to the crash location. These enthusiasts, led by aerospace engineer Richard Godfrey, have claimed they can trace the plane's path using disturbances in radio signals, potentially narrowing the search area even further. While mainstream experts remain cautious about these claims, they represent the determination of people around the world who refuse to let this mystery remain unsolved. 11 years later, there are still individuals spending their evenings analyzing data, running simulations, proposing theories, and pushing investigators to consider new approaches, because the alternative, accepting that we may never know what happened, is simply too difficult to bear. The co-pilot's phone signal looms large in all of these ongoing investigations. It's a tantalizing piece of evidence that suggests so much while proving so little. Was Farik Hamid trying to call for help because something catastrophic was happening that was beyond his control? Was he attempting to alert authorities about a hijacking, a medical emergency, a mechanical failure that was rapidly escalating into disaster? Or was he complicit in whatever happened, and the phone signal was something else entirely? A final moment of doubt, perhaps, a last-second attempt to back out of a plan already set in motion. We may never know his intentions, but what we do know is that in those desperate minutes over Penang, as MH370 descended to 5,000 feet, someone in that cockpit took action. Someone made a conscious decision to power on a cell phone, to search for a signal, to try to establish some connection with the world below. The Malaysian investigation cleared both pilots of any prior issues, finding no evidence of radicalization, mental health problems, or suspicious behavior. First Officer Farik Hamid was described as a competent, professional pilot who was still relatively early in his career, accumulating hours and experience on one of the world's most sophisticated commercial commercial aircraft. Yet in the absence of definitive proof, speculation fills the void. Some theories paint him as a hero, fighting against overwhelming odds to alert the world about a catastrophe. Others see him as potentially complicit in whatever happened, and still others view the phone signal as nothing more than an automatic function, a phone that was already on, simply searching for service as it periodically does, without any conscious human action behind it. The official investigation's conclusion, that they are unable to determine the real cause of the disappearance, reads as both an admission of failure and a recognition of how profoundly strange this case truly is. In an era of unprecedented surveillance, of global satellite coverage, of automated tracking systems and redundant communication networks, how does a massive commercial aircraft simply vanish? The answer appears to be through deliberate, knowledgeable action by someone who understood exactly how to exploit the gaps in our surveillance systems, how to fly beneath radar coverage, how to disable tracking systems in a precise sequence that would maximize confusion and minimize the chance of interception. But that phone signal, that one brief, desperate ping, suggests that whatever plan was being executed, it wasn't perfect. For 31 minutes and 6 seconds, everything had gone according to some script. Communications disabled, course altered. The plane flying undetected along the border of two countries' airspace, in a corridor where neither would necessarily investigate an unidentified radar contact. And then, over Penang, something changed. The plane descended. A phone searched for service. For just a moment, the absolute control that someone seemed to have over Flight 370's fate wavered, and a connection to the outside world was briefly, tantalizingly possible. What happened in that cockpit in the moments before and after that signal? What conversation took place? What emergency was unfolding? What struggle, if any, was occurring between the two pilots? These questions haunt investigators to this day. Australian investigators have suggested that the debris patterns indicate a high-speed, uncontrolled descent, the kind that would occur if the plane ran out of fuel and fell from the sky. But other experts, analyzing the flaperon damage, have argued for a controlled ditching, suggesting someone was at the controls until the very end, guiding the aircraft into the ocean in a manner designed to minimize floating debris. If the latter scenario is true, it would explain why so little wreckage has been found. A controlled ditching that allowed the aircraft to sink relatively intact would mean most of the physical evidence is in one location on the ocean floor, waiting to be discovered. But it would also mean that someone remained conscious, aware, and in control for all 7 hours of that ghostly flight south. A chilling thought that raises even more disturbing questions about motivation and intent. As we approach the end of 2025, with renewed search efforts preparing to resume, families of the passengers and crew continue to hold out hope that this time will be different. That advanced technology, refined search areas, and sheer determination will finally locate the wreckage. That the black boxes, if they can be recovered from the ocean floor, will still contain readable data despite being submerged for over a decade. That those cell phones, those digital time capsules of final moments, can be retrieved and their data recovered. And perhaps most importantly, that the co-pilot's phone signal, that single, desperate ping that has haunted this investigation from the beginning, will finally make sense in the context of recovered evidence. That we'll understand why First Officer Farik Hamid turned on his phone over Penang, what he was trying to do, and what happened in the minutes and hours that followed. The truth is out there, somewhere beneath thousands of meters of ocean water. The wreckage of Malaysian Airlines Flight 370, along with the remains of 239 people and the answers to countless questions, rests in the darkness of the southern Indian Ocean. Every piece of debris that has washed ashore, every fragment of the aircraft that has been recovered and analyzed, points to a crash site that should be findable with the right technology, the right search strategy, and the right amount of resources. But until that day comes, until search vessels locate the main wreckage, until black boxes are recovered, until forensic analysis can tell us definitively what happened in those final hours, we're left with fragments, with tantalizing clues that raise more questions than they answer, with theories that range from plausible to impossible, with a phone signal that briefly connected to a cell tower in Penang, suggesting consciousness, suggesting intention, suggesting a desperate attempt to reach the outside world that failed by mere seconds or minutes. The search continues, the families wait, the world watches, and somewhere in the depths of the Indian Ocean, the truth about Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 waits to be discovered. That phone signal, that one brief desperate ping at 1:52:27 a.m. on March 8, 2014, might hold the key to everything. It might explain why the plane turned back. It might reveal whether this was deliberate action or desperate emergency. It might tell us whether First Officer Farik Hamid was a victim trying to alert the world, or something else entirely. But for now, 11 years later, that signal remains what it's always been, a mystery within a mystery, a digital breadcrumb that leads us toward answers we can see but cannot quite reach, A reminder that in our hyper-connected world, sometimes the most important messages never get through, and 239 families continue to wait for the message that matters most, the truth about what happened to their loved ones on that dark night in March 2014 when Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 turned away from Beijing and flew into history as aviation's greatest unsolved mystery. The phone signal that could solve MH370's disappearance remains just that, a could, a maybe, a tantalizing possibility that keeps hope alive even as the years stretch on. But hope, combined with technology, determination, and the refusal to accept that some mysteries must remain unsolved, might finally be enough. The search continues, the truth awaits, and that phone signal, that brief digital cry from the darkness, reminds us that answers are possible if only we can find where they're hidden. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.